On the 19th of November 2023, Argentina made history when it elected flamboyant politician Javier Milei as their president. This was a historic election not just for Argentina but the world, as the self-described anarcho-capitalist ran on a radical libertarian platform with promises to substantially cut down the size of government, abolish the central bank, and a few other libertarian policies that would make communists absolutely seethe. In the history of the world, libertarianism has never really been fully attempted. Some tenets have obviously been applied here and there, but Argentina has made history for being the first nation on earth to elect a libertarian to lead it. Historically, the unelectability of libertarians hasn't stopped them from trying to lead nations or even form their own countries, and that's what we'll be looking at today. In this video, we'll take a look at some of the most notable attempts by libertarians to create their own nation states, and why these projects ended up failing. These attempts resulted in redrawn borders on the globe, helped fund serious conflicts, and even led to a pretty decent movie on Netflix. So if you enjoy this kind of geography content, please be sure to subscribe. It's free, and you can always change your mind, and let's get into it. So to begin, we start in the early 1970s. The Cold War was hot as ever. Quebec sovereigntists just got elected to government, the first microwave just became commercially available, and someone just tried to assassinate the US president. It was a pretty wild time. It was a time of incredible change across the world, as dozens of new countries were popping out of the old imperial powers that once dominated the planet. And it was also a time when American businessman Michael Oliver was growing tired of rising taxes and what he felt was a growing authoritarianism in the United States. To deal with this feeling of authoritarianism, he had an out-of-the-box idea to say the heck with it and start anew. But instead of just moving to a different country, which all have their own problems, he decided to try and create an entirely new state from scratch with as little government as humanly possible. The concept was simple enough: find or buy land and create a nation. And it didn't take long till Oliver and his associates were able to find some land to buy. That was the easy part. The problem came that no nation on Earth would ever willingly give up sovereignty to another state, particularly one that hated the government. So off to the far seas they went. Following the unwritten rule of finders keepers, the plan was to find some shallow, unclaimed, or uninhabited reefs and build up the reefs into an island from which to born a new nation, which would have zero taxes and almost zero government. Fortunately for Oliver and his group of interested investors, they found exactly what they were looking for 250 kilometers south of Tonga's capital in the Minerva Reefs. The Minerva Reefs are two small coral atolls in the South Pacific, although they are submerged by the sea about half the time. The idea arose to build up the reefs into a couple artificial islands, which wasn't an impossible concept. A few countries around the world have done exactly that over the years, such as China's recent attempts in the South China Sea, with the major challenge being that they're just incredibly expensive to build up. But fortunately, Oliver found some investors that shared his vision of zero taxes and zero government, and so in 1971, barges loaded with sand arrived from Australia, and by 1972, the organization had created a bit of low-lying land, which they proceeded to build up a small steel tower on. Once the land for the country was built up, it was decided that they would be called the Republic of Minerva, after the reefs they were situated on, and shortly thereafter issued an official Declaration of Independence on the 19th of January 1972, and proceeded to send out letters to neighboring countries declaring their intentions to further build up the little islands, and they even created their own currency. Morris C. Bud Davis was elected as the country's first president, and openly stated the basic foundation of the country was that people could basically do what they wanted, as long as it didn't infringe on the rights of others. So if they wished to open a tavern, set up a gambling facility, or make some adult films, the government would not interfere. Unfortunately, the complicated thing about building up a nation is almost as much about having your own land, currency, and flag, as it is about being recognized by other countries that it is your sovereign land. So once word got out about this colonization attempt, neighboring nations were not particularly happy about it. While the uninhabited reefs were not officially claimed by any nation, the Kingdom of Tonga was the closest to them and traditionally used the area for fishing. So as soon as the declaration was issued, the King of Tonga condemned it, and it didn't take long until the country issued an official proclamation that the reefs were their sovereign territory. To solidify this claim, the king himself sailed to the reefs with a handful of troops, and by using some prison labor, constructed some small artificial islands out of coral blocks and concrete on which a flag of the nation would be raised. Later that year, at a meeting of the South Pacific Forum, Tonga's new territory was officially recognized by the rest of the nations in the region. This didn't stop the ragtag group of libertarians though, as President Davis and a handful of Americans would later occupy the territory for 3 weeks before being kicked off again by Tongan troops. Alright, so hypothetically, assuming the country did get created, what would that have even looked like? Well, at full build out, they were hoping to turn the reefs into islands with an area of about 10 kilometers squared, which which would rank it the 194th smallest country in the world, which isn't actually the smallest country, as it's ahead of places like Monaco and the Vatican City, and about half the size of the country of Nauru, which is also in the South Pacific. And the grand idea was to make the two islands into a city-state with between 20 to 30,000 people, making it larger than 3 other nations in the region, with an economy reliant on a mix of light industry, fishing, and in all likelihood tax shelter financial support services. Kinda like Bermuda, but farther away and much more densely populated. The failure of Minerva didn't stop Oliver and his growing group of followers from trying to start a new country, though. However, the next attempt by the newly created Phoenix Foundation was a bit more complex, with the goal shifting from starting a country from the ground up to splitting off a piece of one of the world's colonies before it gained independence to create a substantially more libertarian state, and the Bahamas became the first target. In the early 1970s, the Bahamas in the Caribbean, just east of Florida, were close to getting independence from the British, but there was some underlying discontent on the islands of Abaco, which had some concerns with the country's leadership post-British rule. Many on the islands wished to stay with the British, like their neighbors in the Turks and Caicos and Caymans did, instead of becoming part of a new nation. In 1971, the Abaco Islands Council even submitted a formal petition to the British to remain with them, but the British didn't want to interfere and just ignored the petition, with the following election showing that there was still strong interest in the region for it to gain independence. Yet in June of 1973, just 1 month before the Bahamas officially gained independence, the Phoenix Foundation began financing the Abaco independence movement, whose goal was to split off the islands from the rest of the nation. The Little Separatist Party gained a fair bit of libertarian support through this foundation, especially from people in the United States, with Libertarian Party presidential candidate John Hospers even making a speech at the party's founding convention. It was also during this time that the Phoenix Foundation began attracting some more, let's say, complex characters, including mercenaries who even recommended doing a coup to achieve their goals on the islands, instead of elections. And given some of these people's resumes, that might have actually been a possibility. The coup, of course, never happened, and even the talk of it really discredited the entire independence movement. And following a bit of infighting in the 1977 election in the Bahamas, which resulted in the party not winning any seats and performing quite poorly, effectively killed this movement, and all the hopes of a libertarian paradise just east of Florida. Oliver and associates wouldn't stop there, though, as they made one more attempt that even helped start a war. In 1980, Oliver and the Phoenix Foundation allied with a man named Jimmy Stevens of the New Hebrides autonomy movement. For some context, the New Hebrides were a joint condominium that the British shared with the French, and is now the country of Vanuatu. How this condominium worked is a bit complicated, but essentially instead of going to war with each other, the British and the French just kinda agreed to share a country, with all the weirdness that goes along with that. Stevens gained the support of the Phoenix Foundation, as well as some of the French on the island, to split off the island of Espiritu Santo, the largest island in the country, which is currently home to about 40,000 people, to create the Republic of Minerva. Stevens declared an independent Republic of Minerva on the island of Santo in 1980, and reportedly received arms and funding from the Phoenix Foundation, which was distributed among the island's chief in return for some commercial concessions. Stevens would launch a small rebellion that was also somewhat supported by France, which wanted to keep influence in the region, and their troops didn't intervene when the secessionists took government assets.
On May 28th, Jimmy Stevens declared himself president of Vemerana. Santo town was firmly in rebel hands, and only the French government facilities and police were unaffected by the secessionists. They took Santo's airport and captured the district commissioner with some of his police and officials. Government employees were terrorized, their homes and offices sacked, the British prison emptied, and English language schools closed.
After officially receiving independence and finding France's help useless, they requested assistance from neighboring nations, and Papua New Guinea came to the rescue in short order and helped establish order on the island. This whole affair became known as the Coconut War, and is definitely one of the least well-known Cold War conflicts out there. With the revolt put down and Stevens arrested, the Phoenix Foundation's efforts came to light, and ended the American Libertarians' attempts at ever forming another nation. However, given the complicated nature of this whole conflict and its goals, it's not totally clear if it had necessarily been an actual libertarian state at the end of the day, or just another tiny tax haven, which Vanuatu kinda ended up becoming anyway, at least for a few years. So since creating countries on land can prove to be incredibly difficult, in the late 1960s there was also an attempt at creating a floating country, just off the coast of Italy in international waters. The Republic of Rose Island was dreamed up by Italian engineer Gregorio Rosa as a way to escape the restrictions of the Italian government. Located 11 kilometers off the coast of Italy in what was then international waters, this small floating platform was just 0.004 kilometers squared, or about 400 meters in size, and was fit with a small bar, nightclub, souvenir shop, and even a post office, and became a popular spot for young boaters to party at. Unfortunately for the burgeoning republic, Italy wasn't exactly digging the idea of having another micronation in its area, especially when they view it as just another scheme to avoid paying taxes. So it didn't take long till the police moved in and forcibly evacuated the platform, which was followed up by the Italian Navy using explosives to sink the nation once and for all on the 13th of February 1969, just a few weeks after being established. Netflix later made a movie about the whole ordeal with Rosa's Blessing, which I recommend checking out. Now, there are a few more nation attempts that could be considered libertarian in nature, but I just want to focus on just the most recent. Located between Croatia and Serbia on the banks of the Danube River is the most recent attempt at creating a libertarian country in Europe, the aptly named country of Liberland. This burgeoning republic was founded on the 13th of April 2015 by Czech politician Vít Jedlička of the Free Citizen Party. Vít found out there was an unclaimed piece of land between Serbia and Croatia and had the idea of building Europe's newest micronation, joining the likes of the Vatican, Monaco, and Liechtenstein, with the country's foundations based solely off libertarian principles. And if you're wondering why there's an unclaimed piece of land in a continent incredibly well known for claiming land around the world, it's a little complicated. Basically, after Croatia and Serbia had their nasty divorce, there was some debate over exactly where the border should be. Basically, both countries agreed the border should follow the Danube River, but they differed in agreement on if the border should follow the current course or the historic course from back in the day. Croatia asserts it should be historic, following the course before engineering work changed it, and of course this gives Croatia more land, while Serbia believes it should follow the modern course, since it's more practical and keeps more practical land in Serbia. Due to this, there's land both Serbia and Croatia don't claim. Seeing this unclaimed land, Vít and his followers took advantage of the situation and claimed it for their upstart nation. Though unfortunately the attempts have been a bit challenging, as Croatia has discouraged people to settle on the island, or even to visit it, saying it's disputed land rather than terra nullius, and will eventually be arbitrated to either country rather than a third party. For Serbia's part, they don't really care. As far as upstart nations go, this one does have one of the better chances on surviving, as it's already on an international waterway, and has a decent land area of about 7 kilometers squared, which would actually be larger than both the Vatican and Monaco. But given Croatia's opposition, it's unlikely to ever end up in the United Nations anytime soon. What do you think of these country attempts? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.